Welcome to Deckbuilding Tutor, where we analyze a commander and find the best cards for it. My name is Nick, and I'm your guide for today. This tutorial is about Xavier Sal, Infested Captain, from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I know, Modern Horizons 3 and Assassin's Creed just released, but I don't give a fuck. I'm just kidding, I do. I know I need to keep up with all the trends to grow this channel, so I will be releasing videos for MH3 and Assassin's Creed soon. But I really wanted to build this commander first. I think Xavier has a very unique and interesting build, and it is unfortunately overshadowed by all the legendaries what he has been releasing non-stop. They're even releasing spoilers for Bloomboro now. I don't mind, I think that set is actually nice. Xavier Sal is not overpowered by any means, but I think it's a fun commander to build. Also, his Pirate Last of Us clicker aesthetic is pretty fucking cool too. I chose Xavier because it's one of the few Populate commanders that have the color blue. It will be the central color of this deck. Sal actually means salt in Spanish. So, what better alternate art but Gangplank, the Saltwater Scourge himself. This commander has two approaches, counters and populate, or sacrificing and proliferate. Before we dive into the cards for this commander, note that not all of them will make it into the final deck. However, you can add any you find interesting to your build. We also have a deck analysis at the end to guide you. I will be focusing this build on the +1/+1 counters and populate portion of this card because there are a lot of clone spells in blue that create a token copy of a creature. We will use these spells to copy the best creature on the board. Then, populate that creature repeatedly with Xavier. I put 17 clone spells in this deck, and there are more in the maybe board. Note that we will have to copy non-legendary creatures because of the legendary rule. However, some cards like Irenicus Vile Duplication and Quantum Misalignment gets over this rule. These two cards can copy Xavier himself and allow us to make a token army of Javiers that populate themselves. We will get into more details about these clone spells later on in this video. With the deck having +1/+1 counter synergies and token copy spells, we can both go tall and go wide. Sometimes, we can even make use of the sacrifice and proliferate ability. Xavier may not be the most broken commander, but it is definitely very flexible and fun to play. This deck aims to play creatures with +1/+1 counter synergy on early turns, play Xavier on turns 3 or 4, clone the best creatures on the board on turn 4 or 5, then start the populate engine the next turns. You might find that this commander relies heavily on having counters. That is why I have put 24 sources of counters in the deck. Almost every type of permanent can generate a counter, even our lands and ramp. What is the win con of this deck? Xavier is part of an infinite combo with Intruder Alarm and Master Biomancer. Here are the steps. Activate Xavier Sal's first ability by removing a counter from a permanent you control, creating a copy of a creature token you control that enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters due to Master Biomancer. When the creature token enters the battlefield, Intruder Alarm triggers, untapping all creatures. Then, repeat the steps infinitely. Xavier can also combo with Scurry Oak. Activate Xavier Sal's second ability by tapping it and sacrificing any other creature you control, putting a +1/+1 counter on Scurry Oak. Scurry Oak triggers, creating a squirrel creature token. When the squirrel enters the battlefield, Intruder Alarm triggers, untapping all creatures. Then repeat this infinitely. Once you have infinite +1/+1 counters on Scurry Oak, you may instead use Xavier Sal's first ability to get infinite copies of creature tokens you control. If you don't like infinite combos, we can also just win through value and combat damage. Champion of Lamphold and Herald of Secret Streams can make all of our creatures with +1/+1 counters unblockable, allowing us to swing big. Garruk, Cursed Huntsman, can immediately use his ultimate when we sacrifice and proliferate with Javier. This will permanently gain us an emblem that gives our creatures +3, +3, and trample. Alright, let's go back to clone spells. These spells are highly versatile because they can replicate the strongest creature in play. These spells create a token copy of creature on any board. If an opponent plays a high mana value creature, these cards effectively cheat mana costs, giving you a significant advantage. Then, we keep populating that creature with Javier. Rite of Replication can scale into the late game and create 5 token copies of any creature. Sea Double is an instant which we can cast on opponent's turns, and it can also be used as a counterspell. Late game, we can choose to do both. Tempt with Reflections can only target our creatures, but has the potential to copy that creature multiple times depending on other players. Theoretical Duplication is a 3 mana value instant that we can use to copy a creature that an opponent plays on their turn. We can use this if we anticipate that they will play a big creature or even their commander. Followed Footsteps is an aura that generates a token copy each upkeep. This is a bit slow, but it will generate a lot of value if it sticks around. Elminster's Simulacrum can copy 1 creature on each battlefield, and it is also an instant. This deck does not need to rely on other players for targets to clone. It can also target creatures on our own board. I will show you the best creatures we can copy later on in this video. Endless Evil is similar to Followed Footsteps, but it creates 1/1 tokens and can only target our own creature. However, it only costs 3 mana. Cackling Counterpart has flashback, so we can play it in the late game. Repudiate Replicate can be used to counter an ability whilst also having the option to clone a creature. 3 Steps Ahead is a clone spell that can be a counter spell or card draw. Mirage Mockery has the option to copy an artifact. Quasi-Duplicate has Jumpstart, so we can basically play it twice. Rally the Galadrim has Conspire, which means that it can copy itself. Alright, enough about clone spells. Let's check what creatures we can copy on our board. Creatures that can generate +1/+1 counters accomplishes 2 things. It enables our commander's activated ability to populate, and they're also good targets for our clone spells. Managorger Hydra and Forgotten Ancient both gain a +1/+1 counter whenever a player casts a spell. Since players usually play 1 spell per turn, these 2 can get up to 4 +1/+1 counters in 1 round of the table. Managorger Hydra also has Trample to dish out damage. Forgotten Ancient can also transfer the +1 counters to another creature. Just imagine having token copies of these cards and populating them over and over. It's really fucked up. Shazam Skulker gains a +1/+1 counter whenever we draw, and we have the option to sacrifice it to Xavier when it gets big. When it dies, we can make a shit ton of creature tokens with Island Walk that we could swing at. What do you think? You're right, swing at pesky blue players. Talion's Messenger gains a +1/+1 counter when it attacks, while also letting us draw and discard, which is useful in early game to filter our hand. Ornery Tumblewag gains +1/+1 at the beginning of combat, and also doubles +1/+1 counters on a target creature when it is saddled. When Oran Reef Ooze enters the battlefield, it gives a +1/+1 counter. When it attacks, we put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature with a counter on it. We have more creatures that give other creatures +1/+1 counters. Flaxcaster Frogling has Graph 3 and can give a target creature with a +1/+1 counter Shroud for 2 mana. Tyrannid Prime, Master Biomancer, and Loyal Guardian gives other creatures +1/+1 counters. If we copy Master Biomancer, the token copies we populate creates bigger and bigger Biomancers. The same can be said with Loyal Guardian, where we will get more and more +1/+1 counters to each creature per turn. Gala Greeters is one of the best creatures at 2 mana. We can play this on turn 2 and play Savior on turn 3, allowing us to clone and populate cards on turn 4. Plus, we can create a treasure with it as well. Watchful Radstag has evolved, and whenever it evolves, it creates a token copy of itself, which we can populate with Savior. I really am addicted to synergy. Even our card advantage spells have counters and proliferate synergies. Idol of Oblivion draws a card when we create a token. Tezzeret's Gambit draws 2 and proliferates for 3 mana. Fathom Mage has evolved and draws a card when it gets a +1/+1 counter. Vanguard Suppressor has Squad, meaning it can create a copy of itself, which we can populate. Cold-Eyed Sulky synergizes with +1/+1 counters because it draws cards equal to the combat damage it deals to a player, or we can also create multiple tokens of it. Twilight Prophet draws us an additional card per turn when we have City's Blessing, and it also drains opponents equal to the mana cost of the card we drew. This is an excellent target for clone spells. Sagas are basically an unlimited source of counters for Savior. Plus, whenever we remove a counter from a saga, we get to trigger the chapter's effect again. City of Death is an underrated card. This can generate us 1 treasure per turn, or it basically populates our creature token copies. We can repeatedly trigger this effect whenever we remove a counter with Savior. First Arrow in Games gives +1/+1 counters, draws 2 cards, and creates a gold token. Binding of the Old Gods can destroy any non-land permanent, ramp +1 land, and give all of our creatures Death Touch. There's a variant of Savior that focuses on Super Friends with proliferate abilities, which synergizes well with Savior. While I didn't pursue this build, here are your options. Garruk Wildspeaker is basically a 2-mana spell that ramps you for 2 mana, or you can use it to generate 2 3/3 creature tokens when you have Savior. Garruk Unleashed basically does the same thing, but it can also give 1 creature trample. Nissa Ascended Animist is probably the strongest out of all 3. It can generate an 8/8 token if you play it for 7 mana. Then, we can populate that token with Savior. As I mentioned earlier, almost all types of cards in this deck has counters, even the ramp cards. Kiora Behemoth Beckoner and Kiora's Follower are cards that can untap a permanent. These 2 cards are flexible because we can use them to either ramp or to reactivate Savior's ability. Tyvar is similar, but it only gives Savior pseudo haste. Replicating Ring and Midnight Clock are mana rocks that can generate counters to themselves. Replicating Ring can even duplicate itself later in the game, and Midnight Clock can become a wheel effect for us. If we don't want to wheel, we can manage the number of our counters with Savior. Devoted Druid can get us a lot of mana by putting a -1/-1 counter on itself to untap. Savior can then remove that counter to keep Devoted Druid alive. Emergent Sequence fetches a land that becomes a mana dork with 2 +1/+1 counters when we play a land on that turn. Weatherseed Treaty fetches a land in its first chapter and can be repeatedly triggered by Savior's ability. We also have lands that gain a counter when they enter the battlefield. The best land here is Tenzalor Clock Tower, which can get a counter whenever we tap it. I recommend to have 14 or more creatures that cost 3 mana or lower, and 17 or more clone spells. For ramp, we have a total of 11 cards that gain counters, cards that untap permanents, and your usual 2 mana ramp spells like Rampant Growth. We have 7 cards that give us card advantage, and we usually want to clone creatures that draw us cards. For interaction, we have 9 cards that are a mix of removal spells and counter spells. Here are your options for removal and counter spells in these colors. Feel free to add more if you want more interaction. That's all for this deck building tutorial. If you reached this far, thank you for watching the whole video. Savior is a unique and flexible commander that really made me think outside the box while building. I hope you learned a lot from this tutorial, and explore more ways to build it. There are many ways to approach this deck, so I hope you find what's fun and what works best for you. This has been Deckbuilding Tutor. Thanks for watching my video. If you want to support me and this channel, please consider to like, comment, share, and subscribe.